On our previous video, you guys saw us finally get the E63 started. So now that the car starts, we can start focusing on the structural repair work.
We got some heavy damage on the drive side flitch right here. So in order to actually repair it, the engine needs to be dropped out. But before we do that, all the suspension and the wheel and everything needs to be removed on the drive side. And on the passenger side, the suspension is going to be removed from the subframe, and the drive shaft needs to come out. So yeah guys, let's get straight into it.
So first things first, we need to remove the wheels. In order to remove the alloys, we need to remove the center caps first. In the boot of the car, you will find a wheel wrench. Using the wheel wrench and twisting anti-clockwise, this will remove the center cap, exposing the wheel nuts. To remove the wheel nuts, you do need a special socket. We didn't have that socket at the time, so we just used a 17mm, and with a bit of force we managed to get the nuts off, but we did order the special socket for next time. After a couple of hits with the hammer, the wheel came straight off. This wheel has suffered some significant damage, with large cracks in multiple places and completely losing its shape. While removing the two bolts that hold the caliper, we realised one of the bolts were bent. A few hits with the hammer will loosen the T30. Once the T30 is removed, the disc will come straight off. We then remove the heat shield by undoing the 3 E10 bolts that are holding it in. We remove the bolts holding the caliper sensor. Then using a clamp plier, we pinch the holes going into the caliper to stop any oil from leaking. Rotating the brake caliper anti-clockwise is the easiest way to detach it from the hose. Looks like our clamp didn't do a good job of stopping the oil from leaking. It's now time to remove the hub. We undid the bolt holding the drop link. We removed the bolt from the center of the hub. Then we removed the nut from the bottom of the hub, top of the hub, and then the final nut was located at the bottom, and the hub came straight off. Using the impact gun, we removed the bolt that was holding the arm to the subframe. Because the subframe took quite a bit of damage, the arm was wedged in, so we had to use a pry bar to remove the arm. It's now time to get under the car and remove any components that will prevent us from removing the engine. The first thing that we did was removed oil from the transfer box. This is so when we remove the drive shaft, oil doesn't start leaking out. So the drive shaft came straight out. We undid the bolts holding the sway bar. We removed the arm that was attached to the subframe. So now it's time to remove the driver's side leg. We're going to unplug both sensors. We're going to unbolt the air hose. Once that's done, the last thing to do is remove the bolts from the top, and the leg should come straight out.
So remove all the suspension on the drive side, guys. Like you see, there's one arm that's left to do. I mean, the nut that's on the other side is not easy to get to, so we'll do that later on once the engine's out. I mean, you can see the damage a lot more clearly now. You see the chassis is actually twisted right here. I mean, the lower subframe's got a twist in right there. So the lower...
At this point, the audio cut off, but Z was showing the damage to the lower sill. Every single part that came off that driver's side was damaged. I had a look on eBay to see how much these parts would cost. So the cheapest leg I found was £500. The alloy wheel another £500. The hub with the arms I found for £400. So that's a grand total of £1,400.
So on the passenger side, we're removing that wheel, the arch liner, and the lower control arm. So you're not removing too much. The only reason why we removed all that on the drive side is obviously we're going to replace it and obviously work on the chassis as well. So for now, what we'll do is remove all that and the lower control arms, just so we could get that engine out easy as well to drop that subframe.
We didn't have to remove as much on the passenger side, as long as we removed the arms that are attached to the subframe and the drive shaft. the leg and hub can stay on the car because it doesn't interfere with us trying to remove the engine. So now it was time to remove the steering rack. So we started off by unplugging both plugs. We then removed all the bolts holding the rack in place. The bracket on the driver's side rack was completely broken. Once all the bolts were off, the only thing holding it in place was the steering column shaft. After removing the bolt, a few hits later with the hammer, the rack was off.
So remove the drive shaft and the steering rack, that's all done now. So we moved on to the exhaust. So we got a bit of an issue. This bar that actually runs along here is stopping the exhaust from coming down. And also this under tray is actually touching the ramp. So we got an issue there. So this needs to come off first in order to, even start getting that bar out. So what we'll do is we'll get the car on all fours. Well, the back two wheels on normal ground. We'll get the ramp free and also jack it from the front, from the subframe, from the jacking point. Then we get the under trays off. Then that will give us access to removing these bars right here.
We removed the under tray under the gearbox. We then sprayed the bolts that hold the down pipes to the rest of the exhaust with WD-40. We didn't want to risk them snapping, so we sprayed them with a bit of WD-40. Then we took them off on both sides. Then we unplugged the sensor. We removed the bolts for the under trays located at the sides and the rear of the car. This bracket has bolts that we couldn't get to, so we had to lower the car. Once the car was lowered, we jacked the car up, we lowered the ramp, so we had enough space to remove the under trays and remove the bolts that we couldn't get to. Now that the brackets are free from the sides, we can start unbolting them one by one. It's now time to undo all the exhaust brackets. After all the bolts are removed, the exhaust should come straight out. With the exhaust off, we now have access to the heat shields. The heat shields and brackets that are obstructing us from the prop shaft will need to be removed. So now we start removing the bolts that hold the prop shaft. We mark the prop shaft just to be on the safe side, so when we do fit it back up, we place it in the exact same spot. It might not be that important, you might not have to mark it, but we did. We then did the same thing on the other side. We removed all the bolts and then we undid the middle bracket. Once all the bolts were done, we simply used the pry tool to remove the prop shaft. We unplugged this cable so it doesn't get crushed when we remove the engine. And we also removed the steering column shaft so it doesn't get wedged when we remove the engine.
So we finished off on the bottom. Everything's all been disconnected, like the loom, the steering rack, the column for that's all been removed. We got the prop shaft out. So we're all ready and good to go from underneath. So the only thing left now is removing all the stuff from the top. I mean, there's not much to do. We got the coolant pipe, we got the fuel line right there, we got the three loom wires that go into the ECU that needs to be disconnected. And there's two main wires, one going to the alternator and one going to the starter, that are connected right at the top here. Once that's all done, we should be good to go.
And just like that, the engine is completely free from all the attachments. The plan is to lower the engine onto the table, then remove the mounts which are holding the gearbox and take the bolts off the subframe, which should allow the engine and the subframe to be removed together.
So we removed all the subframe bolts, the gearbox supporting bolts as well, so everything's pretty much ready to go, so you can start removing that engine. What we need to do is lift the car up. We have got a slight issue. I mean, there's a lot of weight on the back and there's not much weight on the front, so we need to be a bit careful, you know, once we're getting that engine out. So the car needs to go up, and the engine's going to stay on the table, and once the car's up and everything's all ready and clear, we're going to get the engine crane in and lift that engine off the jack, off the table. The tables are not very good. One of the wheels is a bit bent, so that's why we put a jack up there, just to support the weight of it.
We raised the car slightly, then inspected the areas around the engine to avoid parts getting caught on each other. We repeated this process until the engine was out.
So we finally got the engine out. It was a bit of a struggle. The chassis was up against the engine on this side right here, so we had to keep watching and making sure that nothing's, you know, touching or getting stuck on the chassis. So yeah, the engine's out. What we're going to do is we're going to get the engine hoist in and get the straps on and get it off the table.
After positioning the crane, we couldn't locate the lift points on the engine, so we decided to place our straps around the subframe. We lifted the engine off the table. Because of the weight of the gearbox, it was causing the engine to tilt, so I had to support the engine while we moved it around. With the engine finally out the way, we can now start focusing on the flitch. We want to get it prepped by getting all the parts stripped off. Our lower sill was damaged, so when it came to removing the wing, it was a bit difficult. The impact of the crash was so bad it's completely bent this bar. The arm for the windscreen wiper was completely cracked. Once we removed the heat shield, we realised just how bad the damage was. This build was going to be a lot more difficult now, and this is definitely going to be the hardest part of the repair. After stripping all our parts, we can now see the full extent of the damage to the flitch, and it's a lot worse than what we thought, so there's a good chance we are going to be replacing the full flitch.
So we move the engine onto a pallet now, so it's easier for us to maneuver around. I've inspected the engine, especially which side the damage is on, and everything's all good. The only one thing that we need to do is replace the inlet manifold. Apart from that, everything all looks good. And also the subframe, as you can see, will need to be replaced. So later on, we'll obviously remove that.
This area here where we got all our parts, we are going to be using this area to do all our pulling, so we are going to have to clear the space out, but that will be on the next video. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have, please do give it a thumbs up, comment, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next video.